Hello, everybody. My name is Oliver Laasch, and this short session on entrepreneuring is being recorded in particular for the colleagues and the students at Rotterdam School of Management at Erasmus University of Rotterdam, but obviously open to anybody else who's using our textbook, Principles of Management, Practicing Ethics, Responsibility, and Sustainability. And the focus of this session will be on the connection between management and entrepreneurship, or as I prefer to call it, entrepreneuring. So the practices that relate to ventures, to bringing resources and opportunities together. And this is chapter 13 of our textbook. So let's start with an example. And it's probably an unusual example if you're thinking about entrepreneurship or business venturing, because there's actually no real business. There's no real product. It doesn't really work along the lines of what we typically would have when we're doing market-oriented activities. And still, it's a great example for entrepreneuring, for the practice of entrepreneuring. And what I'm referring to is the Fusion Festival in Germany. It is a music festival, electronic music festival, which works very, very unusually, really. It is an utopia, if you want, so a kind of bubble that doesn't really listen to the normal market types of logic. So, for instance, most of the people working there are actually volunteers. They're not being paid. You're having an incredible demand for the festival. So too many people wanting to go there and actually being open to paying much higher prices. But at the same time, the entrepreneurs behind Fusion do not allow more people to come there, and they do not raise the prices either in order to decrease demand and match demand and supply as we usually would do, but rather they're actually having a raffle. So on an arbitrary basis, some people get in, others don't get in. And everybody's pays the same price, which is comparatively low. So very, very interesting. Also, another part for the volunteering, so a similar practice in the volunteering area is to actually screen volunteers not for their ability to work there, so for their competences or their experience, but rather screening them if they're in line with that kind of utopian idea of creating a space outside normal society where everybody can just be themselves and experiment with outside societal pressures. So this is one of the main purposes of it. So it's an unusual example, isn't it? But at the same time, I think if you think about practices of entrepreneuring, not as something that's being done just in normal business and under a market logic, but think about it in a little bit wider way, then it makes perfect sense. So the idea is that entrepreneuring is a practice that's centered on venturing. So a venture is some kind of thing, a vehicle that I build in order to create value and I do so by bringing together some kind of resource with some kind of opportunity. And in the example of Fusion, for instance, it was that the people who started the festival, they just stumbled across this abandoned huge hangar area somewhere in the middle of nowhere and thought, well, this is a great resource. What should we do with it? And they were interested in electronic music and in alternative lifestyles. And they said, well, here's an opportunity to actually use that space and to create that kind of bubble that we're talking about. And but this also means that they weren't entrepreneurs originally. They were just people interested in music and seeing an opportunity, seeing a resource, bringing it together with that opportunity. And by doing so, creating value for thousands and thousands of people for many, many years now. And this is what we mean with the entrepreneurial mode. And this also connects to the idea that management and entrepreneuring is something that is very, very closely related, because the practice of entrepreneuring is something that anybody can do independently from their job position or their role. So you don't have to be an entrepreneur called an entrepreneur, somebody who has created their own business venture. You don't have to be that person in order to engage in the practices of entrepreneuring. But we'll talk more about that just a little bit later. So entrepreneuring can be the mode of any manager, just as a mode of practice of any manager, just as it can be the mode of practice of anybody else in any other role. And the idea is that we are actually looking for some type of professional entrepreneuring. And with professional, I don't necessarily mean that you're able to carry it out in the perfect way, but rather that you are able to align that kind of opportunity and the resources that you find with something that's societally or for the planet meaningful. So you're fulfilling a certain good, positive purpose with your entrepreneuring activity, engaging in those practices of entrepreneuring. But the question then is, what do you need to do that? Or what do you typically have if you're doing it? So what does make an entrepreneurial practitioner? So somebody who engages in the practices of entrepreneuring. So what do those two fellows have or don't have at Kobo 360, which is a very interesting venture out of Nigeria. They have made popular a mobile app which helps truck drivers who used to be dropped very, very frequently for the money that they were carrying to pass that money on to them electronically, and this way actually increase road safety in that kind of legal sense much very, very drastically. So what do those two fellows possibly have that makes them engage into entrepreneurial practice in a way that we could call successful? Or similarly, how about those ex-FARC guerrilla fighters who have built a business, a tourism business of people who visit their former guerrilla camps where they used to live in the middle of the rainforest. So what is it that makes people from so different walks of life engage in entrepreneuring practices, and how do we actually what is it that we might help people to develop so that they can engage into those practices? So and there's quite a long list, which is well developed through very rigid research. So, for instance, if you think about the personality traits, typically entrepreneurs are people who have some high need for achievement. They are able and willing to take risks. They have an internal locus of control, meaning that they think they can actually determine how things go. It's not something that's up to the universe, it's something that's up to them. High self-efficacy. So once again, they are actually able to make things happen, particularly when it comes to achieving particular goals. And high extraversion. So somebody who is able to kind of reach out and maintain relationships in a productive way. But then also beyond the individual entrepreneurial personality traits, we do have what we call entrepreneurial orientation, which is something that's more in terms of an overall organization and the people working there, but also which can be in terms of particular practices you're engaging in. So what do you need for them? You need autonomy for entrepreneurial practices. So somebody who actually can take things in their own hands, or have an organization to be able to do that on their own, not necessarily on their own, but in a self-directed way. Those practices need to be innovative because you need to spot an opportunity. It needs to be proactive because you need to reach that opportunity and realize it before somebody else does. Competitive aggressiveness, which goes along the same lines, and once again, risk-taking. So you see there's certain themes that run through all of them. And all of the ones before, they sound quite positive in a way, like some kind of aspirable traits or characteristics. But then again, we also know that entrepreneurs actually often have, or more frequently than the normal parts of the population, have some a little bit darker type of characteristics. And we call those the dark triad. So often entrepreneurs actually are narcissists. So they're feeling superior in a certain way, greater than others possibly. Which leads to certain motives and behaviors and ethical issues, similar to being Machiavellianism. So Machiavellianism in the sense of being somebody who very, very instrumentally tries to gain advantage from their environment, and does so by ways which are definitely self-interested, not always what we would call ethical. Psychopaths, very often we actually do have, well, not very often, but more often than in the normal population, we do have psychopathic traits among entrepreneurs as well. So this is something that might be slightly worrying, wouldn't it? Particularly if you think about the type of behaviors and ethical issues that could come out of it. And This also means that when we are looking at entrepreneurial practices, the motives are really, really crucial. So why am I doing it, and what is the theme, the motive that runs through my entrepreneurial practice? And there's two big categories. So we do have the productive motive, and this is where we are actually trying to tap into some kind of social or societal opportunity where we see some way of making things better, if you want, so in a very broad way. Or you might have an unproductive motive. So if you go to the most extreme case, well, think about somebody who sees an opportunity to steal something or to abuse of the law and to make themselves richer by doing it in one or another way, or maybe to build a business into a loophole that results in a very unethical or irresponsible or unsustainable business. So those would be examples of unproductive motives. So there you're actually value extracting out of the system as opposed to value creating for your own benefit. And at the same time, making the overall system or the area where your value is located, you make it a little bit poorer by your entrepreneurial practice. So one contributes, the other one basically robs, if you want, so it makes it poorer. But then the question is really, if we, the previous points are really important to think about. Who am I? What kind of entrepreneurial activity and practice do I want to engage in? If I'm following an entrepreneur, for instance, or working with somebody, which ones of those positive or rather negative traits do they have? How do I engage in the practice with that person or with those people based on what I've observed? So that's really important. But then we said the purpose of the session is really to see how do management and entrepreneuring practices go together. And I would like to give you two examples to get that discussion going. The first one is that of Lyuda. Lyuda is a synonym, an anonymized name for the actual entrepreneur, but it's a real case. She's from Russia. She did an MBA, worked in the corporate world. Says she was a model before. Very conscious about health and beauty. But doing an MBA and all of a sudden thinking, well, I'm excited about health, about healthy eating in particular. I want to build my own enterprise. So there you see how you can actually shift back and forth, even in the main roles that you take, from being somebody who is in the corporate managerial world to somebody who becomes an entrepreneur and pushes a new business venture ahead. Or you can actually have both roles at the same time. So you might be somebody like Doru in Romania, who is at the same time the founder and now managing director of Mai Mult Verde, an NGO that is engaged in environmental sustainability. But at the same time, I understand he's also a strategy and training director, so a managerial position in another venture that he has not created himself. So you see how those roles very often merge. But going beyond that, it is that actually any manager at some point in time can and probably will engage in entrepreneurial activities. And even if you think about the very basic description of what managers are and do by somebody like Peter Drucker, one of the most eminent gurus of management thought, there you read, managers must convert society's needs into opportunities for profitable business. So this very idea that managers are actually meant to spot opportunities, because managers by definition are the ones who are somehow in control of certain resources. So when they see an opportunity, the idea is that they bring that opportunity together with resources and they create value. And this is what entrepreneurship is all about. So this leads us to the idea that not only is there some managers which are entrepreneurial managers, but in principle, any manager is, or at least can be, an entrepreneurial manager if they engage in that practice of matching their resources with an opportunity. Good, but then it gets a little bit more messy, because now we actually have two different dominant practices interacting with each other. So we've got the administrational, more managerial practice, and we've got the more entrepreneurial practice. And you see here how the roles and behaviors of those practices are not always complementary. So it might be difficult to at the same time be a staffer, so something very hands-on, getting the right people on board, and a visionary. You might not be able to be at the same time a guerrilla thinker, somebody who thinks out of the system, and somebody, an organizer who's trying to get things kind of into a very, very easily digestible and workable structure. So working with the structure versus working against the structure. So just to give you those examples, but at the same time, I think we can narrow it down to two particular characteristics of those two different practices, which we need to be able to do both if we are entrepreneurial managers or managing entrepreneurs, and this is causation and effectuation. So the idea is that typically the administrator's thinking and activity and practice is very, very much centered on causation. So the question is, what do I have? What are the resources that I have? And how do I match those with a goal that I have been given? So it's very much thinking about, okay, I know I need to go there. And now I'm trying to find out how can I put all of the different parts that I have available, all of the resources in line, put them together in order to achieve that particular given goal. So sales goals, for instance, or you could think about staffing goals or market penetration, or you could also think about achieving social goals. So if you're in a social enterprise and, for instance, you're saying, in my community, I want to reduce poverty by this or that percentage. But then if you're looking over to the entrepreneur's typical way of thinking and decision making, it is effectual. So effectual means I'm starting from the resources that I have, but not in order to reach one particular goal. I am actually envisioning what are all of the different goals I could possibly reach with the resources that I have. So I'm building something with what I have that could go into many different directions, and the direction it should take is where it actually can achieve an opportunity. While the causal managerial thinking starts with the already pre-given goal, and that might well not be a goal that is a large opportunity. Good. And then while we're already in the context of what is it that makes entrepreneuring practices unique, there's one more very important thing, and it partly connects to what we've said before. And this is about the practice of bricolage. And bricolage is putting together something that's there already in a new and very unique way in order to realize an opportunity. And I want to give you two examples of that. So this one is Smart Air. So Smart Air is a company that started out selling those kind of air filters in China. But actually the funny thing there is they do not produce fans. You see a fan there. They do not produce those air filter themselves. They do not produce the strap that you see there that holds the two of them together. The only thing that they did was putting those three things that already existed independently together and make it that kind of DIY, very, very cost-effective air filter, which tackles a huge opportunity, because in China we had back then, we still have very, very drastic air pollution systems, and keeping your home at least clean by having an air filter in there is not accessible to all people, because although we do have a growing middle class in China, still there's a large proportion of the population who cannot afford buying a kind of normal shiny looking air filter by one of the big companies like Samsung or higher. So they tapped into that opportunity by just saying, well, look, here's an easy fix. Most of you guys already have a fan in your home. Those filter pads, they're really, really cheap. The strap is even much cheaper. The only thing that we do is we put a little leaflet in there that explains how you put them together, and done. You've got a super, super cheap air filter. So that's bringing resources together with an opportunity in that bricolage way. You put things together that weren't meant to be together originally, but that still can add value if you look at them in the right way. But also there's more, so this was more an innovation kind of product or technological innovation type of bricolage. But also many of the normal managerial activities are a type of bricolage. So think about the joint venture between Cycleland, which is out of Cambridge, and Yuan, which I believe is out of Suzhou in China, as two of the big players globally in bicycle sharing apps, respectively bicycle sharing services, because they do have the infrastructure as well. So once again, it is bricolage, because two very different types of business models are being put together to do something slightly better, because Cycleland itself did have the app, but it didn't have the infrastructure in terms of the bicycles. Yuon, on the other hand, does have the bicycle infrastructure, but doesn't have the local market knowledge or the acceptance of the app in the UK. So this joint venture, in a way, also is a type of bricolage, because Cycleland originally wasn't meant or didn't want to have their own bicycles. It was all based on the users sharing their existing bicycles. And Yuon, on the other hand, originally wasn't meant to go abroad. It was something very centered on the public space, on the urban space in China. So you're recombining in a managerial way here, which is not necessarily about technology. Good. So there we are. This was just probably the first third of the entrepreneuring chapter, but I thought it was an important part. And this is about this entrepreneurial mode of management. And the idea is that as managers, we actually, if we're able to use causation and effectuation and those practices of bricolage, we can be entrepreneurial managers, or we can be entrepreneurs who are managing their venture. We need both of them either way. So it doesn't make sense to strictly separate out, you're an entrepreneur and you're a manager, you're an administrator and you're this visionary genius who makes new businesses. No, most of the times both of them go together, and they have to go together. So number 1 and 2 is what we talked about so far, but I want to give you a quick preview about what else is in the chapter. So we talk a lot about the different types of ventures that this entrepreneuring activity can be contextualized in. So there would be new business venturing, creating new business. There would be entrepreneuring, so bringing opportunities and resources together in an existing organization inside. That's why it's called entrepreneuring. Institutional entrepreneurship, you might not even build an organization. So somebody like Greta Thunberg generating a kind of a movement that she doesn't own, but for which she drives in a certain way, which changes institutions. So which changes, for instance, the institutions of how we address climate change. That would be an example of institutional entrepreneurship. And interestingly, those ventures can follow multiple logics. So if you think about the example again of Kobo 360 earlier on out of Nigeria, and operating across the northern part of Africa, they have, although it looks like a completely commercial venture, they do have a very strong social logic as well of helping truck drivers to live a much safer life, because they're not going to be robbed anymore if they're using that app. At least if it becomes something that runs through the entire industry, and everybody just knows, well, you can't rob these people because they cannot carry any money. So there's a hybrid logic even in ventures that look very commercial from the outside most of the time. And then a lot of the entrepreneurial process, or the success in it, depends on how well you're able to manage the different elements of that process. So how to bring the opportunities and the resources together. How do you build a team and an organization around it? And then the overall process typically is different in the types of practices that you engage in, depending on the stage you're in. So are you just starting up? Are you already taken off? So you already have a venture, but you're growing it, or are you settling down in a way? Have you reached maturity and you're trying to move your venture into a very stable kind of size and shape and position? So of course, at those different stages, and we talk about that a lot in the chapter, different types of financing practices come in, different ways and types of leading and managing come in, but also different types and ways of engaging with your environment in a certain way. So it's important to think about entrepreneurial practice as something that continuously shape shifts as an organization, if that one changes itself through the entrepreneurial life cycle. So you can imagine there's much more out there in terms of contents, of interesting concepts, of cases on entrepreneuring. So I really invite you to have a close look at chapter 13 of the textbook, Principles of Management, Practicing Ethics, Responsibility and Sustainability.